What if I told you that one of Elton John's most iconic songs, Tiny Dancer, wasn't born in a studio, but in the ruins of a heartbreak so raw it nearly ended his career? That behind the soft piano and poetic lyrics hides a moment so painful, so haunting, even Elton himself couldn't talk about it for years? This isn't just the story of a song. It's the story of a man broken by loss, rebuilt by memory, and inspired by a woman whose name you've never heard. Until now. Stay with us, because once you hear the truth behind Tiny Dancer, you'll never listen to it the same way again. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring. The kind that followed something you couldn't quite name, loss perhaps. Or the heavy hush that clings to the corners of a room when someone who used to fill it is no longer there. Elton John sat at the piano in his London flat, staring at the untouched keys as if they were mocking him. He hadn't played in days. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The melody wouldn't come. The words wouldn't fit. It was as if something inside him had short-circuited. He'd tried everything. Isolating himself, long walks through Hyde Park, listening to old records, even calling Bernie Taupin at midnight just to talk through lines that never landed. But nothing worked. What haunted him most was that this song, this elusive thing he couldn't seem to reach, was supposed to be a tribute. A gift. Something beautiful born out of the wreckage. But how do you compose beauty when your world feels like it's crumbling? 3 weeks earlier, he'd gotten the news. A letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just 4 lines. She danced once, barefoot under California sun. You watched. She never forgot. Neither should you. At first, he thought it was a fan. Then came the phone call. A familiar voice. Shaken. Quiet. Someone from long ago. Someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. She's gone, Elton. And just like that, the past cracked open. Her name had been Lucy, a ballet dancer. Wild, vibrant, and free-spirited in a way that made the world seem weightless. They met in the early 70s in Los Angeles, where the music scene was electric and emotions ran high. Their connection had been brief, but unforgettable. A spark that lit something in both of them. He'd watched her dance once, barefoot, twirling through an empty theater after hours, her laughter echoing against velvet seats. That was the night he first thought of the phrase tiny dancer. But he never told her. Now, years later, she was gone. Cancer. Quick. Cruel. And the last words she left behind were those 4 haunting lines. Lines that seemed to hold all the pieces he had left of her. And so here he was. Haunted. Hollow. And hopelessly stuck. He ran his fingers across the piano, finally pressing a single key. A soft note. Then another. He stopped. Something didn't feel right. He opened the lid of a nearby trunk. Inside, a dusty box filled with letters, old photos, and a cassette marked Studio, 1972. He slipped it into the recorder. The tape hissed, then crackled to life. It was her voice. Reading something. A poem. Hold me closer, tiny dancer. His breath caught. He paused the tape. Looked down at the piano. Suddenly, he wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting soft golden lines across the wooden floor of Elton's studio. He hadn't slept much. That cassette tape had stayed on the table all night, like a ghost refusing to leave. Her voice, those words, the way she said hold me closer. It echoed in his mind like a forgotten chorus that had always been waiting to be sung. He sat at the piano again, fingertips hovering. The keys no longer looked like strangers. They looked like old friends finally willing to talk. He pressed one, then another. And slowly, like dawn breaking over a silent field, a melody began to rise. But something was still missing. He called Bernie. I need you, he said without greeting. There was a pause, then Bernie's familiar voice came through. I figured you might. You sound different. I am. 3 hours later, Bernie Taupin stood at the threshold of Elton's studio, his boots tracking dust across the polished floor. The 2 men embraced, quick, wordless, and then sat across from each other, the way they had so many times before. But this time, it wasn't just about writing a song. It was about healing something broken. Elton played the few bars he'd worked out. Bernie listened, eyes narrowed. Then he nodded. You're not writing about her, Bernie said softly. You're writing to her. Elton's throat tightened. He nodded. She danced, he whispered. And I never told her what it meant to me. How it stayed with me. She deserved that song. Then let's write it, Bernie said, like she's sitting right here. For hours, they worked. Phrases flew, melodies shifted, memories surfaced. Elton told Bernie everything, about Lucy, the theater, the barefoot dance, the letter. Bernie took notes in silence, then passed Elton a scrap of paper. Just a few lines. Blue jean baby, LA lady. Seamstress for the band. Elton read it, blinked. That's her, he murmured. The melody surged. Fingers danced across ivory keys. And suddenly, the room was no longer silent. It was alive with the sound of grief, joy, memory, and music, woven into something real. The next day, they recorded it. Studio lights glowed warm as Elton's fingers moved with new certainty. The engineer said nothing. He knew better than to break the spell. When the final note faded, Elton sat back, eyes glassy, breath shallow. He didn't say a word. Because sometimes, when a song finally says what you couldn't, there's nothing left to add. Months passed. The song began to live its own life, far beyond the walls of Elton's studio. It found its way onto radios, stages, and into the hearts of millions. And yet, for Elton, Tiny Dancer remained something more intimate. It wasn't just a song. It was a heartbeat, a memory, a conversation he never got to finish. Critics called it poetic. Fans sang it at concerts, arms around each other, voices cracking on the chorus. But only Elton knew the ache behind each word. The real story. Her story. One evening, after a show in New York, Elton found himself alone at a small diner, still in stage clothes, eyeliner smudged, heart buzzing from the crowd's energy. The jukebox played softly in the corner. A waitress walked by humming the tune, his tune. Elton John, she said, almost not believing it was him. That song. Tiny Dancer. My mom used to sing it to me every night. He smiled. She had good taste. She passed last year, the waitress said, lowering her eyes. I play it when I miss her. Elton's throat caught. That's why we write songs, he whispered, more to himself than to her. Back at the hotel, he opened his notebook. Not for music this time, but to write something else. A letter. He never sent it. But it began with Dear Lucy. He poured out everything he had never said. The apology. The gratitude. The pain. The hope that somewhere she had heard the song and smiled. That she knew he had written it not just for her, but because of her. That night, he left the letter on the nightstand, right beside a copy of the Madman Across the Water album, where Tiny Dancer quietly lived as track one. Years passed. Elton's fame soared. He wrote more songs, won awards, played for kings and queens. But whenever he performed Tiny Dancer, something shifted. His fingers lingered longer on the final chord. His eyes often closed. And sometimes, just sometimes, he could swear he felt her there. Dancing. In the back row. Barefoot. Smiling. Because in the end, some songs aren't just melodies. They're memories. And so, Tiny Dancer wasn't just composed. It was carved out of grief, loneliness, and a desperate longing for peace. Behind the music we all know and love, there was a man sitting alone at a piano, unsure if he could ever feel again, let alone write something beautiful. But in the silence of a sleepless night, memories began to speak louder than the pain. The twinkle of a smile, the flash of blue jeans, the warmth of a moment lost in time. Each note he played was a whisper from the past, and slowly, painfully, something magical began to take shape. This wasn't a song written to be famous. It was written because Elton John had to. Because music was the only language his heart still spoke. Because sometimes when life shatters you, art is the only way to pick up the pieces. Tiny Dancer became more than a melody. It became a lifeline. A prayer. A tribute to a time, a place, and a feeling that could never be relived, but always remembered. And maybe that's why the song still touches people today. Because we all have a tiny dancer somewhere in our past. A person, a moment, a dream. Something fragile and beautiful that slipped through our fingers. Listening to Tiny Dancer is like opening a box of forgotten photos. It hurts, but in the sweetest way. It reminds us we were alive. We loved. We lost. And somehow we kept going. So, the next time you hear those opening notes, remember what it cost to bring them into the world. Remember the heartbreak, the silence, the spark of inspiration born from the ashes. And remember that behind every great song, there is a story. A story that deserves to be told. If this journey through music, memory, and emotion moved you even just a little, don't let it end here. We share these stories not just to entertain, but to connect, to heal, to remind you that even in your darkest moments, you are not alone. So please like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. There are so many more stories waiting to be uncovered, stories of pain, beauty, resilience, and truth. Because sometimes all it takes is one story, one song, one shared memory, to remind us of who we really are. And if you're still here, it means the story touched something deep within you. That matters. Because every viewer, every listener, Every soul who connects with these moments keeps their meaning alive. So stay with us, more stories are coming. Stories that might just change the way you see everything.